We were at church probably 6 days a week.
Whoa. Holy shit. Why?
So, okay.
That's the most I've ever heard.
Okay, so Sunday we had 2 services. We had a Sunday morning and a Sunday night service. They were 2 different ones. Not like churches now that are like, oh, come to the 9:30 or come to the 11 o'clock on Sunday service. No, they were separate services, so we were required to attend both. So there was a Sunday morning and a Sunday night service. Mondays, I think, were the only day that we weren't at church. Tuesday mornings, there was like a 7 a.m. prayer meeting. Wednesday was the sort of casual like book club Bible study. Thursday night was another midweek church service. Fridays, I think that wasn't necessarily every week, but Fridays were the day that they had for like women's ministry, or they had like a men's group or something. That's what's happening at the church. And then Saturdays, we were on a rotating basis for cleaning the church building, like people who attended the church volunteered.
That's what the tithe is supposed to be for. Misty, thank you so much for joining me on Growing Up Fundie. I'm so ready to talk to you about your story. Your story is so fascinating because it's got this combination of elements. The minute I read your story, before you even sent me the further details, which just solidified my need to have you on, I had just never heard anything like it. It's got elements from stories I've heard before, but it's got personal twists on those elements. And either I think people will listen to this and they'll go, I didn't think anybody else knew what I was experiencing, or they'll go, I thought I'd experienced it all and now I'm hearing more. Yeah. But what I also liked about your story was your story is a lot of also your mom's story. A lot of what you were telling me, like decisions she made and things that she did, I was like, wow, this is kind of a twofer almost. And it kind of gives us details on how a lot of times who we are as people begins before we do, in a way. But enough from me. The audience is probably like, let us hear from the guest. Who are you? What are you doing here?
So I'm really excited to be here. So my name is Misty. I'm 32. I'm a basic white girl.
Yes.
So I love Taylor Swift. I love pop music.
Yes.
I'm actually really obsessed with lots of pop culture things because I was not allowed them as a child. So now I'm just like, yes.
Make it up for last time.
Trashy pop music, 100%. Like, give all of it to me.
Yes.
So I am no longer religious. I deconstructed at about age 21 when I was in college, and I'm sure we will get to the details of that later. But I was religious for most of my growing up years. I was definitely fundamentalist as a child, and then when I was a teenager, we moved more into what I would call mainstream evangelicalism. So I was allowed to wear pants and watch TV, but it still was a lot of the same belief systems. So a lot of the core sort of religious tenets were still there.
Yeah.
And so then once I got to college, I learned a lot of stuff that I had never been allowed to learn before. And so that was really what set me down the path. So
and
here's where we are now.
Something that I thought was really interesting was that you had mentioned briefly that your parents weren't even that religious prior to having kids, and then they had kids and suddenly it was like, oh, we've got to get right with God. And like, do you know who, like, why they decided that was so important, or why?
So I know that my dad grew up attending a Foursquare church, and I don't know a ton about the Foursquare, like about their specific set of beliefs, but I do know that they trend very conservative. And so my dad grew up kind of on and off going to a Foursquare church. And so then by the time he got into adulthood, he just, I think, was never really that invested in it. And then my mom told me a story that she had accepted Jesus when she was a teenager at some event she had gone to with some friends from her school. And then sort of never thought about it again until, 15 years later or so when she started to have babies. And so it was at that point that she, like, I think the way she explained it to me once was that it wasn't just about her anymore, that
Right.
she was responsible for these other tiny humans.
Right.
And so she really felt that she needed to get right with God so that she could raise her children the right way and all that kind of stuff.
And you guys ended up going to, I've got the list here. You guys were part of a lot of different religions. And
We sure were, buddy. So many.
Yeah. I thought the path from one to the other was really unique. And when I was a kid, my mom used to call us, and now I realize this is totally inappropriate language, but my mom used to call us religion whores because we went to so many different kinds of churches just to try them out, just to see what they were about. And I'm like, I can't believe I was at the age of like 11 telling people we were religion whores, and like nobody stopped me from saying it. But regardless,
I mean, I personally love the juxtaposition of that.
Yes. But if I were to say that,
would find it a little offensive.
Right. And if I were to say that now, she would be like, how dare you use that language in my house?
Yeah, right. So inappropriate.
The 90s.
Like, Mom, you taught me this, but okay.
Yes. Yeah. You just think I don't remember because it's been 30 years. So you started Jehovah's Witness.
Yes.
That was kind of where it all began.
So my first religious experience that I remember, I was about 5. And so we did about a year as Jehovah's Witnesses. The parts I remember that we briefly did door-to-door evangelizing, right? Where we had we had tracts or something, right? And so, my dad was working and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. So we had to go wherever she went. And so we would go out and I would walk and my little siblings would sit in the stroller, and we would go door to door around our neighborhood and we would try to talk to people about coming to church. So I have vague memories of that.
Did they actually listen, like, because there were kids there? Do you think
I think they were nicer to us because there were kids present, and like I said, I don't remember a ton about it. I generally remember people being generally polite. I don't really remember like having doors slammed in our faces or getting cussed out or anything like that. And I assume that's because there were children, which, But so I remember that. I remember that our specific church that we attended had this big terrarium in the back. There's like big glass walls, and they had like a couple rabbits and like some turtles. There was like a pond, and I was 5, so I was like eye level with the rabbits, right? And I thought that was like the coolest thing ever. What were they saying at church? I had no idea, but there were rabbits, and that was really cool.
Right.
And then also because I was 5, I was old enough to have received Christmas and birthday gifts. And so then that year, my birthday's in August. And so, it was like birthday and then Christmas a few months later. And so that year I didn't get anything. And that was very offensive to me as a 5-year-old. And I was like, me, and I'm not getting birthday presents. Yeah. And I didn't understand why, right? Like now I understand about their beliefs about, pagan associations with the holidays, whatever. But at the time they were just like, you don't get any birthday presents. And I was like, wow, so rude.
Wow. And that's like, and all jokes aside, like that's big for a little kid to not get birthday presents or Christmas presents when, one, you have all this time. 2, if you have any friends, they're getting them, and you're probably getting invited to parties and birthday parties and things. Although maybe at 5, most of your friends are probably at the church, so maybe they're not having as many. But that's
but if we had stayed, though, that definitely would have been an issue, I think, for sure. But yeah, so we were only Jehovah's Witnesses for about a year. And I don't off the top of my head. I do know that my mom was not satisfied with the answers they gave her. In her quest to get right with God and to raise her children, my mom was very concerned about sort of picking the right one, right? And as well as I do, that everyone is convinced that they are the one true religion. Oh yeah. Right. And so my mom had reached out to these different pastors at these churches in the small town where we lived, asking them a bunch of questions that she had. And I was very young, so I couldn't necessarily tell you like what kinds of questions she was asking. I would guess it was a lot about like, what happens after you die? What exactly does sin mean? Right. Like, how does one cleanse themselves from sin? Like, et cetera. Like, pretty standard stuff, I would think. But so she reached out to a number of other pastors looking for answers. And so some of them she did not like. And like I said, I was a kid, so I couldn't tell you why she didn't like them, but she did not agree with the answers. And so the one that she did finally agree to, that she felt at least had the most answers, was the United Pentecostal Church. And that's where we landed. And that's where I was for 7 years.
Yes. And while I was reading your email, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Oh, she's asking questions. She's like talking back. She's telling them like, this doesn't work for me. That doesn't work for me. She's deciding for her family. Like, and then you're like, and we joined the Pentecostal church. And I was like, no, wait. It was going so well. Right? Oh, no. Yeah. It was like, we settled on Spirit Airlines. And you're like, oh, boy.
There were so many other options. And this is the one we went with. But okay. So then we were Pentecostals for, I think 7 or 8 years. And also I will tell you that, and again, we'll talk about it, as we move on, to the other experiences that I've had, but, every time we've left a church was because my mom was doing her own learning and researching and became convinced that that whatever the pastor was preaching did not line up with what the Bible said. And I don't disagree with that inherently, but every time we left a church, like there was one specific instance we'll talk about later that was due to some like church infighting, and so it was kind of like the church kind of split and people took sides, but even that was sort of like based in like, oh well, the preacher is interpreting the Bible to mean things that it doesn't say or whatever. And that's always been really frustrating to me as a person who deconstructed, is that like, absolutely question your faith, know what you believe and why you believe it, what is the evidence for why you believe it. And people that like try, and so they're like, I want to ask questions and I want to learn, and then they just go from one flavor of Christianity to a different flavor of Christianity, like not even a different religion. Like it makes more sense to me, but like, oh yeah, I converted from Christianity to Islam because they answered a lot of questions that Christianity couldn't answer for me. That would make more sense to me than I went from being Presbyterian to being a Pentecostal to being a Baptist to being non-denominational. Like
pepper, paprika, salt, same meal, same dish.
It's the same stuff. And so so that was a little weird. Like every time we left a church, it was because my mom was like, well, they're not preaching what the Bible says. And I'm like, well, it's kind of becoming increasingly obvious to me that I don't think any of them are preaching what the Bible says.
And that was one of the things that really intrigued me, was I'm like, it's almost like so close. It's like none of these people are teaching what the Bible says. And you're like, yes. And just like the Bible says so much different than what there's, and you're like, yes. And she's like, so we're going to a different church. And you're like, no, wait. There is another option. There's another one. There's a different option. Wait, hold on. You don't have to go if you don't want to. But I just thought that was really very, very interesting.
Yeah. And so other churches.
What was your dad doing during all this time? Was he just vibing? Was he just like, all right, here we go? Like,
yeah.
Do you think your dad's like deconstructed? Do you think he's like?
Definitely not. Okay. So my dad, I would put in the category of like, I think he's closer to being a deist more than anything else.
Got it.
He definitely, even when we were regularly attending church, he always kind of gave me the vibe that he went because my mom told him to go. And it's like, especially because lots of within conservative Christianity, right, there's a lot of emphasis on nuclear families and on, the man is the head of the household and the spiritual leader and whatever. So
we all know it's the mom. We all know it's the mom.
Yeah, we know. Like so many people that I've talked to were like, oh no, my mom definitely ran the show at home. And I'm like,
it's the mom. Yeah. The dad could have been at home. He could have, if it wasn't going to be a family fight thing, he just could have stayed home.
Yeah. And so my dad believes in God. He definitely has some problematic conservative viewpoints. But I do think my dad is kind of in a place where, like, if I could just present it to him in a way he can understand, I think he would get there. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Like, does he say homophobic stuff? Yes. But also we've had some conversations about like actual gay people. And he's like, yeah, if two men want to go get married, like that's fine. Like that's their business. Like, I just don't want to see it. And I'm like, okay, well, he's a little confused, but he got the spirit, right? Like we're stepping in the right direction.
Yeah.
And
absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. So my dad, I think that my dad generally trends more towards what I think conservatism used to be in America, that a lot of it was very live and let live, right? And maybe that's closer to what we would call libertarian beliefs now. It's all kind of muddy, but the idea that like I'm over here living my life. I choose to live it according to, you know, biblical principles. You can do whatever you want over there as long as it does not bother me.
Yes.
Right. And I'm like, cool. We love that. We love that energy.
Yeah.
Like, that's fine. I have no issues with that. Right. Whereas my mom, on the other hand, I think she was desperate for something to explain why life was the way that it was.
Yeah.
You
Like,
know,
it sounds like she was really like struggling. It sounds
yeah.
like she
And
wanted it really bad and like just couldn't find what she was looking for.
and so I've heard bits and pieces of sort of my mom's like life story. Some of it she was not very forthcoming about when I was a kid. But like I know, so my dad was her third husband. The two prior to that, she got married at 18 to the first guy that proposed to her. He was physically abusive to her, and she had to like leave in the middle of the night, so he couldn't come find her. So there was that. The second husband was also physically abusive. And I believe the second husband is when she had an abortion, which she forgot she brought that up to me. And then I brought it up one time and she was so mad that she was like, how do you know about that? And I'm like, how else would I know about this, Mom? I didn't even exist at the time. Like,
yeah. You're like, I wasn't there.
Right. Wow. And that was a point of contention, right? That she was like, well, you know, I didn't want to be trapped in a marriage to an abusive man. Hey. And I'm like, what do you know? That seems like a very valid and logical reason to seek out abortion services.
Yes.
You know, it's the whole, like, you know, the only moral abortion is my abortion. Like, it's kind of that same thing.
And you're like, I'm sitting here telling you that's okay. You made a good decision.
That was the right choice for you to make.
Yeah.
So there was that. My mom's mom, so my maternal grandmother, died of a brain tumor when my mom was 21. Man. And so, you know, just my mom really did have a very hard life in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons that were outside of her control. It wasn't just her off being wild and sort of, you know, making bad decisions. And so I think that, you know, by the time she was in her 30s, she was getting ready to sort of settle down a little bit, right? And she had kids, that she just wanted something to explain why her life had been so hard. And so being able to point to God in the sense that whether it's God is testing you, whether it's that, well, there's sin in the world and that's why we experience these things, but God's going to get you through it, or, you know, there's a reward waiting for you in heaven, whatever it might be. Those things are very comforting when your existence is pretty shitty on a day-to-day basis, right? Yeah. You want something to make it matter and not just that it sucks. You know?
The way you worded that is, I've never heard it worded that way. That's the perfect way to word it. Something to make it matter. All the suffering, all the pain, all the anguish, all the abuse. And even if you haven't been abused, just the day-to-day struggles of being alive.
Just living paycheck to paycheck, of dealing with your own mental turmoil, whether that's mental illness, whether that's drama in relationships, whatever. Like,
something
being
to
a human sucks sometimes.
Matter. Yes, absolutely. Wow. And so after she decided that the Pentecostal church was for you, that lasted a while, right? Like, that was one of the ones that stuck.
It did. So, so I'll talk a little bit about the UPCI, which is the United Pentecostal Church International. That's the organization. So the UPCI is very legalistic in nature. They are very much a letter of the law, not the spirit of the law kind of people. So, for example, so there is a verse in the Bible that talks about how women should not plait their hair or wear gold jewels. And I can't remember exactly what the rest of the verse says, but the context of the verse is definitely like, you know, you should be a beautiful person on the inside too, that you should be a good person and not just put on a lot of makeup and flashy clothes to make people think that you're great.
Right.
But we sat through a sermon about that once when I was like 8 or 9, and I'd worn my hair in a braid to church that day. And I remember, like, while the pastor was talking, my mom just reaching over to start pulling the braid out of my hair.
Wow.
Because we, at that point, that the pastor had been like, you know, that it was sinful for a woman to braid her hair. I guess because it wasn't natural, which, like, I didn't really understand, and I still don't understand, to be honest.
That's wild.
So like I wasn't allowed to wear pants. Pants were for boys, right? So I wasn't allowed to wear pants. Very strict on modesty. I had to wear skirts that came below the knee. I wasn't allowed to wear sleeves shorter than the elbow. I was not allowed to wear makeup. I wasn't allowed to wear jewelry. We weren't allowed to watch TV because that was evil. We weren't allowed secular music.
Wow.
So, it's a very, very insulated community.
Yeah. And that
I
must be
think the term now is high
confusing, too.
control group, I think is the
Yeah.
commonly accepted term. I would
Yeah.
absolutely quantify the UPCI as a high control group.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're a cult.
Yeah, that is the word I would use as a person who was there. But I know some people get real weird about the word.
They're a cult. I said it. She didn't.
Right?
I did.
Yeah. But so there was a lot of emphasis on controlling the members of the church and who they talked to, how they acted, what they wore, what they ate, everything. It was definitely a place where marriage was encouraged very early. Was wild to me when I got into college, and I so I met other adult people and had an adult friend who got married sort of for the first time and went to the wedding, and I had all of these college friends who were like, oh yeah, this is the first wedding I've ever been to. And I'm like, how? Like, how have you lived 19 years of life and never been to a wedding? Like, what? Whereas I had been to like a dozen of them, right? Which is a lot. It is excessive, and I acknowledge that.
That is a lot.
But that was very common. Like we kept it in storage. We had like an arch that was already made up with like lights and like flowers and stuff. And just, someone's getting married. Got to pull it out of storage so we could set up the church.
Someone's been courting for 6 months. Time to bust out the wedding decor.
Well, and also too, like sometimes we would get couples who, like we had a couple in our church who had been together for over a decade that had several children together that owned a house, but they had never gotten married. And so then when they were indoctrinated, is what happened, they converted, but they were indoctrinated into becoming Pentecostals. That was like, well, you have to get married because that's like what God wants. And so we threw a wedding for them. Right.
I would have just lied and been like, we're married. We got married over the weekend.
Yeah. Like, what are they going to do? Like ask for your like marriage certificate? Like,
wow.
Maybe, I don't know. But
I was going to say, actually, probably.
We didn't wear jewelry, so nobody wore rings, right? Like even wedding rings were not allowed. Like we didn't wear, yeah.
I'm actually surprised that women weren't required to wear them mostly as like a symbol of ownership. I'm surprised by that.
That is a little surprising, but and I don't know that that's necessarily true across the Pentecostal denomination. At least in ours, like no jewelry was like a hard rule, and so that included things like wedding bands.
Interesting. And that must have been confusing for you as a kid to go from, no, we're not celebrating holidays. Yes, we are, but we're not wearing pants anymore. And we're not wearing jewelry anymore. Also, the braids you've been wearing, not allowed to wear those. That's got to be like, and being told that that's because that's what God wants. But then earlier you were told God wanted something else. Did you think about it much, or did you just go with it?
I think that I was young enough at the time that I did just kind of accept a lot of it. Like it was confusing, certainly, but I think a lot of it was just like, oh, sweetie, we don't wear pants anymore. What do you mean I can't wear pants? Well, see, God thinks it's a sin. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Like I was 5. Like I didn't have enough knowledge or context to be like, but that doesn't match the other thing that you said, right? I was just like, oh, okay. That's what we're doing now. So at the time, I don't know that I did as much, but yeah, so I do remember as part of our time that we were there, I remember when I was a little older, maybe like 9 or 10, at the end of the year, the church would issue tax documents to everybody about like the tithes they had paid, right? It was basically like a receipt. It was like a receipt that you got of like, here are all of the tithes
so they
paid to the church over the
year.
year.
They kept track of everybody's tithes then.
We did, and I do remember, and so this was the 90s. My dad was working in construction, so he was probably making like 60 or 70 grand a year, which like is like a good amount of money, but not
back then that was pretty chunky.
And we were a single income household. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, right? So my dad was working. And my parents that year had paid about $12,000 in tithes to the church, which is way above that 10% number that is commonly thrown out, right?
Yeah, nowadays that's like 20 grand.
Well, and so the way that I remember hearing it explained was that, well, the tithe was 10%, but then there was the offering, which you were also expected to give to because the offering was different, right? Like the tithe was like standard church operation. Yeah. And then the offering was like, we're supporting missions or we're trying to get a new roof for the church or whatever.
But isn't that what the tithe is for? Okay, I guess
isn't that what it's supposed to be for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where did the tithe go?
What was super interesting though is that the pastor's daughter, when she turned 16, got a brand new sports car Wasn't that super interesting for this man pastoring a church of like 75 people?
Misty, that's what God wanted.
God wanted her to have
How
her
is she supposed to spread the word of God, even though she's not supposed to because women don't preach? How is she supposed to be successful in her ventures for God without a car, without a really nice car?
And she really needed a brand new one, and she really needed the sports car. Just like, the Toyota Corolla wouldn't have done it. I
don't question God. I just do.
Yeah. So,
wow.
So I don't, like I said, I don't remember a ton because I was very young. I remember being very bored during church services. We were at church probably 6 days a week.
Whoa. Holy shit. Why?
So, okay.
That's the most I've ever heard.
Okay. So Sunday we had 2 services. We had a Sunday morning and a Sunday night service. They were 2 different ones. Not like churches now that are like, oh, come to the 9:30 or come to the 11 o'clock on Sunday service. No, they were separate services, so we were required to attend both. So there was a Sunday morning and a Sunday night service. Mondays, I think, were the only day that we were at church. Tuesday mornings, there was like a 7 a.m. prayer meeting. Wednesday was the sort of casual like book club Bible study. Thursday night was another midweek church service. Fridays, I think that wasn't necessarily every week, but Fridays were the day that they had for like women's ministry, or they had like a men's group or something. That's what's happening at the church. And then Saturdays, we were on a rotating basis for cleaning the church building, like people who attended the church volunteered.
That's what the tithe is supposed to be for. What are we paying for?
And so usually once a month or so, then we would go like Saturday morning and we would clean the church. We would, we'd move all the pews, we'd vacuum the floor, we'd clean the bathrooms. Like, it wasn't a big church. Like I said, we really ran about 75 people. And so the church was like, there was the big sort of main auditorium. There were a couple of very small classrooms, and then there were 2 single stall bathrooms, and that was it. So it wasn't huge, but like we did not have staff to clean it like church members did.
I gotta be honest with you. Even at my most devout, I would have hated that shit. I would have been so resentful. I went on Sundays and Wednesdays, and I still dragged ass getting there. Like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was a lot. And I was homeschooled, right? Because we know that the public schools are evil and indoctrinating the children. And it
probably made it easier too to go to like 7 a.m. services and things like that during the week if you don't have to.
And so as a kid, that was the only thing I knew, right? Like, there were some kids in our church that went to public schools because they didn't really have a choice. Like, their parents were working and stuff, so they like had to go somewhere. So, so we were even amongst like the weird religious people, I was a weird kid because I was homeschooled. Like that, I know in other fundamentalist communities, like homeschooling is kind of the standard, but at least for us at the time, it was not. We were unusual in that regard.
So you guys were the fundies at the Fundie church, because we always had the extra fundy people.
Yeah, I just think about like, so, they talk about how the Pilgrims came over on the Mayflower to escape religious persecution. And then you learn that it's like, no, they were the wackos, and that England was like, yeah, you're too weird, we don't want you.
They got driven out.
We were the Pilgrims in the situation, right? Like that was us. We were the weirdos amongst the weirdos is really what was happening. And I was too young to understand that, right? Because it was just how my life was. And I knew that other kids went to school, but I was like, I go to school, it's just in my house. Like, right. I did a lot of very religious homeschooling curriculum. I did PACES.
Oh,
do you know about PACES? Are you familiar with those?
Is that the book that was IBLP? Like,
I think so.
At home?
Yeah, and it has these like really terrible comics, right? That are like super racist and that are like, oh, Jesus says that, blah blah blah, with like little speech bubbles.
This woman kissed a man before her wedding. She's burning in hell now, and that's like the whole comic.
Yeah, like, right. Okay. And I think there is like a singular Black character that appears in all of it, and I think that the Black character only shows up so they can talk about why racism is actually okay and why God wanted it. So,
Yep.
But so I did PACES as a kid. Like, it still kind of shocks people when I tell them I didn't really learn the theory of evolution until college. Like, the only thing I learned as a kid was that there are scientists that say we came from monkeys. That's so stupid. And I'm like, well, yeah, when you say it that way, it does sound stupid.
Yeah.
But so I never learned it, just that the evolution was made up and stupid and bad and wrong. And then I got to college, and then I like was taught the actual theory of evolution. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot more sense, actually.
Was getting into college difficult having been homeschooled, or do you feel like you learned a lot by the time, like, how does that, I've always wondered how like people who are homeschooled transition into college, and also was there any like pushback when you were going to go to college, or were you expected to go to college?
So I did do a couple of years. I did my junior and senior year of high school at a charter school.
Interesting.
And so a lot of it was that at that point, me and my siblings had basically like sort of bullied my mom into letting us go.
Yeah.
We just, at the time, we were living very rurally. We lived in a very small town of like less than 1,000 people.
Wow.
The church that we attended was about 25 minutes from us.
Wow.
And we were homeschooled, right? So we had no friends that were
Right.
not kids we saw once or twice a week at church at youth group.
Yeah.
And we were bored, we were lonely, and so we were like, Mom, we got to do something about this. And so
Yeah.
finally, the three of us, me and my brother and sister, were like, Mom, we're not going to do this anymore. And so she was like, hi. So, but of course, we could not go to the regular public schools because once again, they were going to, you know, indoctrinate us or whatever.
Right.
I still turned out bisexual without the public school. So sorry, Mom, didn't work.
It's probably from hanging out with all the girls groups at church, maybe.
Yeah, let's put all of the girls together. Wonder why they turned out gay. So I did the charter school for a couple of years. So I was at least like exposed to the idea of like going to classes with other people and like being on a bell schedule and like that sort of stuff.
And like social, just kind of like basic social development.
Yeah, and like don't get me wrong, I embarrassed myself a lot as a teenager.
Oh yeah,
because I had like no sense of like what was considered acceptable, what was normal. Right? Like I like to think that I was just awkward and not creepy. Like I hope that it was mostly just awkward. But and then I also did community college.
That's good.
We were very poor, and so we didn't think that university was even like, I have a bachelor's degree now, but at the time, right, that we were like, we didn't even know that was going to be a financially feasible option.
Yeah.
So my parents were like, well, you know, I was like, FAFSA will help me pay for community college. I don't have to pay any actual money to them. And so they were like, well, if you can go for free, like, yeah, that's fine. And of course, they were really big on like, you should choose like a 2-year program where you can just like do it and be done, you know, like pick something like nursing or an IT certificate or something that I could
get your
MRS.
College.
Yeah. And I really didn't want to do any of that. Like I did look into those things. And like I looked into beauty school for a while. I knew a lot of girls that went to beauty school. I think because that was like a traditionally feminine career choice that you could do.
And like nursing
degree, and it was like fine, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do more, and I wanted to try more things and have more experiences. And so there was a lot of pushback when I made the decision to go to a university.
Wow.
And a lot of it was blamed on finances, which is a very valid concern. Don't be wrong, but my brother also decided to go to university to pursue engineering, and they had no problems with that.
Finances were made to happen when that came about.
Right. Like me and my brother both had to take out loans, and like, you know, we tried to do it responsibly. We did it manageably, you know, like I came out of school with about 25 grand in loans, which is a lot of money, but not hundreds of thousands, right?
Yeah. Like that's a lot, but that's pretty damn good.
Yeah. And so my brother came out, I think with about the same amount of debt. And so, we made it work, right? We figured it out.
Yeah.
But my brother, when he was like, yeah, I'm going to go to the university and get an engineering degree. And they were like, okay, good for you. Have a good time, sweetie. And then I was like, well, I want to go to university because I was a teacher for a while. And so I like wanted to go get my teaching degree. And they were like, well, we just don't know about that. It's very expensive. And like, you know, the big liberal universities. Have you thought about a Christian college? I was like, do you think the engineering they teach at the Christian college is different than the engineering they teach at the regular college? Because I don't think it is.
One is God's engineering, and the other is secular engineering.
Right. You're so right. So that's on me. That's on me. That's my bad. But yeah, so and like I said, like college was kind of the big catalyst, I think, for my deconstruction. So
yeah, was there ever a time that you can remember in college that it was like really thrown in your face that you had grown up strange, weird? Like, because I remember being religious, like, wasn't odd at all. And then when I was around like 26 or 27, that's when I started to meet a lot of people who had never been raised religious whatsoever. And they thought I was weird, when I can't remember meeting an atheist that was open about it, at least. And I would have thought that was weird. Was there
Right.
ever a time where everybody was like side-eyeing you a little bit about something you said or did, or?
So not like in a really dramatic way.
Yeah.
Like I was pretty open about the fact that I was a Christian, and also when I started college, we had crew on our campus. Kids Who Think for Christ, yeah.
Yes.
So I was really involved in crew for a while. So I spent a lot of my time hanging out with other Christian college kids, right?
Right.
But through that experience, though, I had a friend. Her name was Sarah, which is a generic enough name. There's lots of Sarahs in the world. But so my friend Sarah, and she was a little older than us. So I was 19 when I started my community college, and she was, I think, like 25. And by that point, she had already lived a lot more life than me, right? She had dealt with some drug problems. She had been pregnant and then had a stillbirth. And so she was sort of, still grieving and sort of processing that.
She was like an adult woman.
Yeah, like not the rest of us 19-year-olds that thought we knew everything, right?
Not like a legally adult woman, but like an actually adult woman.
And so she did believe in God, and so she came to our meetings, and she was, trying to get an education. She was trying to like make a better life for herself, and she definitely did believe, but she also like swore sometimes, and she also like had some very different life experiences from me, and I never like. And I hope that she never felt this way about it, right? But like, I never was really judgmental about it. Like, I never thought like less of her because I was like, oh, you had sex before marriage, or like, oh, you like did some hard drugs one time. Like, I was just like, oh, you've had these other different experiences, and that's so interesting because it's different for me.
Yeah,
and
like
also,
not relatable.
Right. But she still was like, but I'm still trying to live the best life that I can. And that was very different to me, that she was sort of open about those things, that a lot of the very sanitized Christians that I grew up around. And like, not that those Christians didn't also have problems, because they definitely did.
They definitely
we didn't talk about it. Right. Like, people in the church don't talk about, like, unless it's like the giving testimony, right? Giving testimony, then it's like, oh, I was addicted to all the drugs.
You make it a testimony.
All the sex, and I was gay, and then God saved me from all of those things, right?
Yes.
But if you're just like existing in the church on a day-to-day basis, like, you don't talk about the fact that like you had a miscarriage. You don't talk about the fact that you've been divorced a couple times. You don't talk about the fact that you used to have a drug addiction, right? Like, oh no, we have Jesus now, so everything is good and amazing, and we don't talk about things.
Yeah, right? Unless you're using your story to teach somebody else why they shouldn't do it, then you don't talk about your story. Yeah.
Right. And so that was, like I said, even though and a lot of the other people in our group, I think, were much similar to me, right? That it was mostly white kids who grew up in Christian households, who lived a very sheltered and insulated life, whereas Sarah had not. Sarah had actually had some very like difficult, but some different life experiences.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, so there are people who have these experiences that are still living for Jesus. I'm like, that's cool. And then also when I was in college, like I actually like had friends that were gay for the first time. Like, I knew that gay people existed. We actually had a trans person who attended a church I went to for a while. I'll tell you that for a little bit. They kicked her out. So, but,
wow.
But so like I hadn't really had like friends that were gay, right?
Yeah.
And I definitely had. So when I was in high school, I Kissed a Girl by Katy Perry came out. And for about 2 weeks, all the girls at my school were bisexual.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, here's a list of all the girls that I've kissed or whatever, right? And so I was like, oh, so other people also think about kissing girls. Oh. And then after 2 weeks, and they were like, no, just kidding, I'm straight. I think girls are disgusting. And I was like, yeah, me too.
You don't want to kiss anymore, I guess?
No, right. Yeah, that's totally not it at all, right? And so, but so I never really had gay friends until I got to college. And so then I started meeting people, and what do you know? They were just people that happened to be gay. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And even when
they're not like converting you to Satan worship or anything like that.
Right. And even when I was religious, and like I sometimes joke that this like made me a bad Christian, right? Is that I believed being gay was a sin because that's what I was taught. But I always took issue with like, why is it worse than all the other sins? And also I feel like if you want someone to know the love of Jesus, that maybe telling them like, hey, your lifestyle is disgusting is not the way to get them to your side.
No. You tell
like,
them.
Even as like a 14-year-old, I was like, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
No, what you do is you tell them love the sin or hate the sin. That
Yeah.
way it's love, but it's condescending love, which is better.
Yeah. No hate like Christian love, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so I started like having these experiences that were wildly different from what I have been told to expect, right?
Was it scary, or were you like all for it? Were you like, cool?
Initially, I was just really excited.
Yeah.
Initially, I was very excited that I was just like, oh, I'm just like learning so many things, right? Because I think at the time, I wasn't learning anything that was inherently incompatible with my belief system, right?
Right.
I was learning new stuff.
Yeah.
And so because I was learning new things, it was like, oh yeah, like I've met so many interesting people. And like, I made friends with a girl in I was part of an honor society because I'm a nerd. And so I had a friend who was Muslim, and I had never actually met a Muslim person in real life before because I grew up white and Christian and sheltered. And so we spent one day at lunch for like 2 hours talking about the differences between our religions because she had never really had Christian friends before.
That's cool.
And so we were just like, oh, I believe this. And I was like, oh, us too. And then I was like, well, what about this? And she was like, well, we actually believe it happens slightly differently. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. When I was asking her, I was like, do you actually pray like 5 times a day? Like, do you really do that? She's like, I try to, but I'm really bad about remembering to do it. So, right. And I was like, oh, what do you know? There are also Muslims that are not super on top of practicing their religion, much like Christians are, right? But I just never had that experience before of like a person who was just as religious as me, but in a different religion. And I was like, oh, well, she believes hers just as much as I believe mine. Right. And so like, did I still think she was wrong at the time? I did. But I wasn't inherently just like, oh, it's my job to convert this person, or that I was like, I'm not going to talk to you anymore because you're different than me. Right.
Right.
And so, so I guess that, are we at the talking about the deconstruction part? Because I feel like that's
I'm just following along. And, well, so when you got to school, were you at all kind of on guard? So, for example, when I first went to college, I remember thinking like, my job is to stay steadfast in my faith. I'm not going to party. I'm not going to do drugs. Because, of course, I thought that people were just going to be giving out drugs, which it turns out is not. I don't think is the case. Maybe not at my school. It was a very rural school. Ridiculousness. But I remember being like, oh, this is my chance to protect myself from temptation and to like prove to myself that I don't have to be tempted to, do all the bad stuff, like drink and do drugs and stuff like that. So for like the first year, maybe the first, I'd say the first year, I was kind of that uppity girl who, like, not only was I not going to the party, but I was making sure you knew that I wasn't going to the party because I'm going to study and do well in school and go to the campus ministry. So have fun, I guess.
At your sinful party.
Right. Where it's like, girl, just say you're not going. Like, you
could just not go. It's not a big deal.
Just don't go. Like, relax. I don't know. What was your experience going in? Were you worried at all? Were you excited? Was it just pure excitement for you?
So, I, even as a kid, or as a teenager, right, when I was sort of thinking about my future and what I was going to do as an adult and everything, I wasn't initially set on going to college. Like, that wasn't initially the plan. But I do remember hearing people talk about it, right, and about the indoctrination that occurs on college campuses. And it always just sounded fake to me. And that's like, I don't really know how else to articulate that to you because, like I said, even at the time when I was like 15, right, like I had no knowledge of what was actually being taught on college campuses.
Right.
But like the idea that there were these institutions of learning that were churning out doctors and lawyers and engineers and teachers, and that all of them were just trying to turn all of us into like heathen pagan worshiping Satanists. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
It's like, right? I mean, is the Satanist going to still be able to remove the tumor from my brain? Because if he is, then I guess
that's fine. I don't care. Like, whatever, right? Like, I don't care what he believes. Just like, do you know what you're doing? That's what matters. And so, so even though like I had heard that, I always did, I think, generally sort of make the assumption that it was exaggerated or that it was like very limited to like Maybe there are some schools that have a very specific agenda, but it can't be all of them. That just doesn't make any sense to me. And so when I got ready to start in my community college, I think that my parents were a little more open to that because a lot of the talk was about the university, right? Oh, the universities are the ones where they do all the research and all the science, where they try to prove that God isn't real. But
The
community
laboratories.
college, but your community college is like, we have some boys that play baseball and some old ladies that take water aerobics classes. And also you can do some gen eds for cheap. And so I was like, all right. So and also like they had a Christian Bible study group on campus, right? So we had crew and things like that. We had Young Life for a while. And so my parents, I think, were a lot more open to the idea of community college. And so that was reassuring to me as a student, right? Because even my parents were like, oh no, like it's probably fine. And also just make sure that, you're really like staying involved with the church and that you're like plugged into a youth group or, like a college group, whatever. So I thought that I was doing all the right things in terms of being a Christian while also being on a college campus. And then by the time I got to my university, I wasn't religious anymore. So I didn't have to deal with any of that.
And so tell me a little bit about that. So how do you go from devout Christian, like evangelical, not just because, I loved what you put about how like there was that brief time where you guys were not denominational, because we all know that means Baptist. We all know that's what that means. We talk about that on this podcast all the time. If you're not denominational, you're just Baptist. Just say it. And in your description, you were like, they weren't that much different, to be honest. So what was it, or what series of events do you think it was that took you from I'm an evangelical Christian to I don't even believe in God anymore? How does that happen?
So I think that my experience with that is a little bit different from other people's deconstructions. Only in the sense that, like I've watched a lot of content. I listened to some of the stories on your show of other people talking about their experiences. And a lot of people seem to go through this struggle of dealing with sort of like the tenets of their faith, right?
Yeah.
Taking issue with, well, if the Bible says that it's okay to beat your children, like, am I really okay with that, right? If the Bible says we should hate people because they are gay, like, are we really okay with that? And it sort of starts that way, right? Whereas for me, a lot of it was really about sort of the logistics of whether or not Christianity was valid as a religion.
And it sounds like that's what your mom was also kind of going through too. Like, this doesn't add up.
Yeah. And so I did Summer Project, which is a short-term missions thing that Crew does. And so I did not go overseas. I stayed stateside, but I lived in San Diego for a summer with about 100 other college kids.
Wow.
And they spent the whole summer talking to us about, how to be missionaries and how to, preach Jesus to the world and whatever.
And San Diego is one of the most forsaken by God liberal cities.
You should have you ever heard them talking about Australia and how unchurched Australia is? It's hilarious. I'm like,
I know a couple of Australian
people, bro. Like,
but not only that, but Hillsong came from Australia, which is arguably like, how do you say that? Like, they have
I know it's crazy. But so I was like, I get to go to the beach every day. That was great for me, right? So I lived in San Diego for a summer, and so I. On the one hand, at the end of that summer, I felt closer to God than I had ever been. But on the other side, that summer had raised a lot of questions for me that I had not previously considered. So one of the things that Crew was really big on was sharing your testimony, right? But here's the thing. Lots of us came from white, lower to middle class backgrounds who grew up very religious in mostly white communities. And not that we didn't have struggles.
Persecution.
Right. And not that we didn't have life struggles, but in terms of like the flashy testimony about how God saved you from drugs or sex or whatever, like we don't have that, right? Like none of us had those stories.
God
we
saved
had
me from sleeping in on a Sunday morning and missing church.
Yeah, right. Like, I'm so glad God was able to help you with that. But like, I remember right at the beginning of the summer, they like to put you in small groups and then force you all to like trauma dump on each other. That's how you bond, right? Is like, oh yeah, tell me your testimony, which is like, tell me about all the traumatic things that happened in your life.
I'll do that for free at the right party. I'm just gonna throw that out there.
let's have a couple edibles in. Like, you want to hear about it? Let me tell you.
Don't throw me with a good time.
Yeah. But so like I remembered that we were sitting in our small group, and one of the girls in my small group, her confession, like for her testimony, was that she masturbated. Like that was the issue. And that, you know, she, like, I remember specifically she used the phrase that she had been clean from it for a certain number of weeks at that point. And I was like, it's not drugs though. Like it's not like smoking or alcohol. Like is, you know, and like I learned about like, you know, sexual sin and whatever, but the idea that she viewed it that strongly, because I didn't. I had not grown up with that.
It was like weighing on her that heavy.
Yeah, and that like made me really sad, right? But that was kind of like her one thing. And I also just remember being like, I've known this girl for 10 minutes. And also because I was Christian, when I was like, when you say you have a problem, like, is it like you do it once a day? Because I feel like that's a very normal human thing to do. Or is it like you are compulsively doing it multiple times a day, in which case that's like a separate problem, right?
Right. Like if you're a sex addict, that's different than.
Right. And also, I had known her for 10 minutes, and that just felt like a lot to share with a person you had known for 10 minutes.
I don't know your birthday, but I do know that you masturbate every day.
Yeah, right. And so stuff like that. There were a couple of kids on this trip that we had a girl that was bisexual and a boy who was gay. And the boy who was gay, I actually became very close friends with. I had a crush on him for a little bit, and then we talked about it, and he was like, "You're so pretty. I think you're so great, but I'm not interested." And at the time, I just took that to be like, not me. And then later I was like, oh, well, yeah, now that makes sense. He doesn't like girls. I got no offense taken. I understand.
My first 3 boyfriends were gay. I get it.
The struggle, right?
Yeah.
But so the way that like he told me that he was gay, like privately, because we were like friends, but they made him get up in front of the whole group and share his testimony with the group about how his uncle had abused him as a kid, and that was apparently what led to him being gay. And that God was helping to free him of his same-sex attraction.
What the fuck?
And even at the time, even with the beliefs that I held, that just did not sit right with me at all. And then the girl who was bisexual, they had her also similarly get up in front of everybody and talk about that she had been in foster care briefly. And so she and the family she was living with, that she and one of the girls had like a thing. It was like her first sexual experience. And again, right, because they all have these like really like traumatic stories about their first sexual experiences.
So sad.
And that's clearly what made them gay, right?
Oh, obviously.
Yeah.
Like
so stuff like that just during the summer of crew, that I was like, you know, like I did do a lot of growing in my faith and feeling like I was really close to God, but I also was like, I really don't know that I vibe with some of this. Like, I just really feel like that's not, and I didn't necessarily articulate why I had a problem with it at the time, but I just didn't like it. Right. And
it's like,
feel right to just,
can I be close to God without crying over somebody's masturbation habits and hearing about somebody's child molestation experience that I have known for 5 minutes? Is that possible?
Right. Yeah. And so when I got back that summer and I started college again in the fall, I entered into what I would call my liberal Christian phase. So
I feel that.
Yeah. So my liberal Christian phase was me trying to justify my worldview with some of the problems I had with it, right?
Yep.
So I did a lot of researching on scripture of like how the Bible doesn't actually say that being gay is wrong, or that the Bible doesn't actually talk about premarital sex, or that actually the only time abortion is mentioned is directions on how to do one, right? And
or
like
it says this, but like it's nuanced. What it actually means is
right. And so I read a lot of that kind of stuff, trying to sort of justify it. So I started doing that. The other thing that happened to me that semester is that I took Psych 101, which is a very basic class that all kids are required to take in college.
I feel like that's the one that changes everyone, either for better or for worse. It depends, but that's like the class that gets everybody.
So in this class, one of the first assignments that we did is that we read an article by Carl Sagan, who I love. We stand Carl Sagan. And it was talking about ways of knowing the world. right?
Okay.
And so in the article, he makes the argument that he uses science as his way to know the world, because science can tell us if something can be repeated. It can tell us if something can happen in a different variety of ways. We can show it to other people, right? It isn't just something that happened to me one time. I can be like, no, here is the science of like, here, so I understand that the earth is round, or that, how the sun rises and sets, or how plants grow, or whatever. And so we read this article, and then I had to do a written response about what my way of knowing the world was. And the prompt was something like, what is your way of knowing the world? If it's not science, what is it and why? And because I was a Christian, of course, I wrote it about my religion, right? And so I wrote my response and basically was like, I believe in science broadly, but that I was like, I'm a Christian. I use the Bible as my way of viewing the world, that it tells me how the world is and what the world is like and how I should exist within it. And that I relied on that a lot as my way of knowing. And so I turned it in. I got the paper back like a week or so later, and I got full credit for it because I had explained myself pretty well. But my professor had left a note on it, and the note that he left was, is this a way of knowing or is it faith? And I didn't understand what that meant. So I went to go talk to him about it. I went to his office hours and I was like, hey, so I wasn't angry. I was just confused, right? And so I was like, can you talk to me a little bit about what you mean by this? Like when you say a way of knowing in faith, what do you mean? And so we talked about it, and he was very polite and very respectful.
Yeah, and it's a great question.
And he wasn't trying to challenge my worldview, right? That's what he was trying to do. He was trying to challenge the way I thought about it, right?
Right.
And so he was talking about it. He's like, when we talk about science as a way of knowing the world, it's something that we can physically see with our eyes. We can hear it with our ears. We can smell it. We can record it. We can do it more than once to see it happens again, right? So there is evidence to support why these things are true. Whereas the Bible, nobody was there. Nobody can vouch for it because you can't repeat creation. You can't repeat Noah's flood, right? So you just have to take everything that it says on faith that it is actually true. And like I said, he was very respectful in the way that he talked about it. Like he wasn't like, oh, well, just because you just believe in it doesn't make it true. Like he didn't say that, right? But he was basically like, it is different. Like I would call that faith because you have to have faith that even though you can't repeat it or you can't know for sure, you're trusting it anyway. And so I was like, oh, I had never really thought about it in that context.
I think that's really cool because it sounds like he was respectful about it, but he also wasn't just going to give you the grade and the points without challenging the difference between what he was looking for and what you were saying. He was like, I'm glad you wrote the paper, but let's think about this for a second. Are you sure that's what you're talking about?
Yeah. So that really was a big catalyst for me in terms of, right. So I was already in the liberal Christian phase of trying to justify I was coming to terms with the fact that I myself was bisexual. I was really involved in our campus pride club. I had a lot of friends that were in the pride club because all of the gays fight each other, right? We all become friends. Right. And so I was trying desperately to justify being okay with gay people with also still being religious. And so I was already doing that. And then I had this conversation with my professor about faith versus knowing the world. And that really set me down a path of not just the, how do I make my religion work or how do I make it fit, but why do I believe this at all? Right? Why do I put so much faith in this book? Why? Because I've been taught my life. But why do I trust it? Right. And so I started doing some research, and I did even though I was only 21 and I didn't have a ton of knowledge about it, I did think I should hear from both sides, right? Which is a big no-no in Christian circles. They're like, oh no, you can't read the atheists because they're just going to indoctrinate you, which if your argument holds up, then it shouldn't matter, right?
No, but it's because the devil is what makes
the devil's in those pages of that book. The devil's going to come for you. And so I started reading and researching, and I did a lot of reading from Christians. Like I read The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, which is a terrible book. 0 out of 10. That guy sucks.
Do not
if
recommend.
If listening to this, you're awful, and you should probably have the book removed from the shelves. It's terrible. But so I read that. I read a couple of other Christian books or like Christian commentaries on sort of like the history of Jesus, or things that were like, sort of trying to provide some validity to the scriptures of like, here's a historical event that matches up with something that happened in the Bible or whatever. But then I also started doing research on the other side, right? Because again, I was of the opinion that if I am correct, then my argument should hold up, no problem.
Why would you be afraid if you're
and
correct?
Also, I was of the opinion that if I'm going to try and go out and share the gospel with others, I probably should know what other people believe so that I could counter those points, right? That would make sense.
You're making too much sense, Misty.
That's always been my problem.
Good.
I asked too many questions. That's always been my issue. And so I started doing all this reading, and the more reading that I did and the more stuff that I learned, the harder it became for me to make it fit, right? The harder it became to sort of arbitrarily force my beliefs to fit with this new knowledge that I had about the world and how it worked.
Yeah.
I did a lot of reading about the Council of Nicaea, and sort of how that came to be. And so I guess for the listeners, right? So that was a bunch of church leaders that got together to argue about which books got to be in the Bible. And so it was no women were present in that meeting. It was all men, educated men, right?
Our emotions not like get in the way, we get so emotional. We have our period, and then we're putting stuff about feelings.
Just those hormones, man. I can't be trusted. But so like I did a lot of reading about that, and I was like, what do you mean a bunch of people arbitrarily decided like, we don't like this one, so it's not going to be in the Bible. We've just decided this, right? So I took a lot of issue with that. And then kind of the shelf break moment for me was that I read The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. And Richard Dawkins, also brilliant scientist, terrible person. Terrible garbage human being, but he is really smart.
At once.
Yes. Right. So I read, and also his writing's a lot softer, I will say. He's a lot angrier in person, but his writing's a lot more like measured and professional.
It's the editors. They're like, man, you can't say this
honestly,
shit.
You're probably right.
Yeah.
But so I read The God Delusion, and I remember like I checked it out virtually through my college library because I could not have, like I was living at home while I was going to college. I could not have that book in my house with my parents, right? So I had to read it online secretly through the ebook available to my college. And I read the book, and I remember getting to the end of the book and just having sort of an existential crisis of like, I don't think I believe in God anymore. And this is something that I think people who have deconstructed do understand, but I think that for other people that perhaps were not as religious don't get it. I really did feel like the world was going to start coming apart at the seams.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, because it's like sometimes the analogy I use when talking to non-religious people is it's kind of like when you learn that your parents are Santa. Right?
Yes.
So you learn, you get all the magic, right? And you put out cookies and the presents just magically appear. Yes. Maybe your parents are really extra and make little, footprints of snow or whatever. And like, it's a magical experience. And then one time you catch your dad eating some of those cookies you put out for Santa while putting presents under the tree. And now it's all ruined forever and you can never go back.
Yes.
Right? It doesn't matter how much they tell you. Well, you see, your dad just needed a snack. Your dad was helping Santa, whatever. It doesn't matter what they can tell you. You're like, I have seen the evidence and I know that you're lying. I know it's not true.
Yes. Right? I try to explain to people, it's not a choice. Yeah. It's not a choice. Deconstruction is not a choice. Unless the choice is, am I going to continue to lie to myself and everyone around me, or am I going to be honest about who I am?
Right.
It's literally a case of I can never unsee what I've seen. I can never unlearn what I've learned. And for most people, at the beginning, it is not a pleasant experience at all. You don't enjoy finding out that you're not going to be one of the ones to make it to the end. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to be one of the ones who can live, breathe, and die the rest of your life, knowing that at the end you get heaven and you get to see everybody who died that you missed so much. Like, it's traumatic.
Yeah. Oh, and a big part of it for me in particular was I had spent my entire life living under the assumption that God had a purpose for me, right? God had a plan. And so whatever terrible things might have happened to me, whatever hardships I went through, it didn't matter because I was doing it for God, and God had a plan, and I didn't know what the plan was right now.
And
but
it would all make sense
comforting,
one day,
right? Like God will make it make sense one day, and God's always got you, even when times are hard. And I had spent my entire life trying to search for God's purpose, right? Like, what does God want me to do? What does God want me to, like, what impact does God want me to leave on the world? And so upon not believing in God anymore, everything just temporarily became meaningless for me, right? Everything. And I was like, the TV shows I watch, me going to college to get a degree, making relationships with other people, literally none of it matters. Like, all of it's completely meaningless because there is no God and there is no divine purpose for the world, and it's all just random happenstance, right?
Yep.
And so that I lived in a lot of sort of anxiety and existential fear for a couple of days. And then after a couple of days, like, I went to sleep and woke up and went to school and saw my friends, and I went to work and I ate food and watched TV shows and did normal human stuff. And the world did not end. The world did not quit spinning because I didn't believe in God anymore. And so then I was like, okay, so I'm still really upset about this, but it does appear, at least immediately, that the world is not going to explode. So now that we've gotten past that hurdle, let's try and figure out the rest of this. And so a lot of the beliefs that I held, like, I know a lot of people that go through deconstruction spend a lot of time sort of like theologically taking apart those beliefs and trying to really understand, like, what does the Bible say? What is sort of the history of how this belief came to be? Because, like, a lot of those beliefs did not come from the Bible. They came from IBLP, or they came from other religious organizations that have been just justified with the Bible over time.
They're not beliefs, they're instructions.
They're
policies,
what you do, essentially, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so a lot of people, I think, go through that, whereas for me, I didn't, because for me, right, I was like, well, if I don't believe that the Bible is really the word of God, and I believe that it's just a collection of philosophical musings from random people across history, then why would I live my life according to anything those people tell me? And so, like, obviously, and that wasn't like an immediate process, right? Some of those things took me years to unlearn. Some of those things I'm still unlearning now at age 32. There's still some things that I'm like, do I really believe this? Why do I believe this? Right? Like, why do I think that?
Yeah. Or like those moments. I don't know if your church was big on like rapture stuff, but like even now, my brain goes, but just what if for like 1 second,
right? You like walk into Walmart and like don't immediately see employees, and you're like, probably they're just busy, but what if it's the end times? What if it's happened just now, right? So yeah, like I don't have that anxiety as much now. I do still occasionally like the thought occurs to me, but I'm not immediately like, you know what I mean? Like I don't immediately feel like anxious about it.
I do pray when there's turbulence. Not gonna lie. I do pray. I'm like, hey God, I know I had this whole podcast and I'm sorry about that. Just in case we go down. I just would like to remind you that I was saved, and according to you, at least the Baptist version, that can't be undone. So I'll see you soon.
I'm not gonna lie to you, I also still hold on to that. I just was like, well, like, am I a terrible sinner now? Yes, but I did believe in Jesus at one point, so theoretically I should be good.
I am saved. You can't undo that. So
right, I'm gonna use Calvinism to my advantage here. Like, it's already been decided, and I can't change it now. So
yep.
But yeah, so in terms of unlearning a lot of those beliefs, like, so all of my like anguishing over trying to like be okay with being bisexual and also being okay with loving my LGBTQ friends and neighbors and trying to make it fit in the Bible, then I was like, well, all of those people just made it up and none of it actually matters. So actually, I do not give a fuck if you're gay and that's your business. Like, live your best life. It just like didn't matter anymore.
Don't include the biblical part. It all works. All of it works. It makes perfect sense when you
I was like, abortion. Like, I identified as pro-life for a long time, right? And I was like, nope, I really don't. Like, if it was just a religious thing, like, because I was like, no, like I see the argument for why a person might need an abortion. I see the argument for it being medical care and not, right? Because they always throw it out as like girls that just go and have sex and have abortions every weekend. And I'm like, that's not happening in real life. Nobody does sex.
You know who would have that fucking attitude? Men.
That's so true.
Men who don't know what it.
That's so true.
I would not even have my period on purpose if it meant I didn't get pregnant. I wouldn't even do that. I hate that shit. Like, the only people who think girls are just gonna do it for birth control are people who don't know what it's like to be a woman.
It's like, I took Plan B one time. It was like the worst 48 hours. Yep. I got so sick. I felt so terrible. I bled a lot. Like, it was awful.
And for anyone listening, it's not because she was having an abortion. That's not what Plan B does.
No, it forces a period. That's what it does.
Miss me with that shit. It works before the egg and the sperm even join. So I don't want to hear that shit. Anyway, sorry. I just had to make a disclaimer.
No, that was a very good PSA. Thank you for that. But yeah, so a lot of those beliefs that I held were really only because my religion told me to hold them. And so once I didn't have the religion anymore, then I was like, well, then I just don't care. Like, it just doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
You know? Because, and I think that probably there are a lot of religious people that if they were able to see that, I think would go that way, right? Like, I think that, like, if you ask an average Christian person in America if they care if gay people can get married, I think on average they probably don't. You know what I mean? No. Like, do they want to host gay weddings in their churches? Maybe not. But like, for gay people to get married, they're like, that's fine. I don't care, right?
Yeah, I know more people who identify as Christian that are actually pro LGBTQ and like go to Pride and celebrate and like, but actually also act on those beliefs. You know, lots of people go to Pride but then don't do shit about it afterward. Like, but are actually very welcoming and inviting. It's a new thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, like I said, like it wasn't immediate. There were some things that took me a lot longer than others. I definitely dealt with a lot of body image issues.
What did that, like, how did your deconstruction impact your body image?
Well, I bought my first bikini at age 27.
Wow. Good for you.
So that was a big deal for me. I'm wearing a crop top today. You can kind of see it. Crop top today.
Wow, I still am not in my crop top era. So congratulations to you. I still can't do it.
That's okay. And if you get there, I love that for you. And if not, that's okay too.
Yeah.
So a lot of the body image, right? Like, I spent so much time learning to cover myself up so that I wasn't tempting to men. And so
that even the Bible says they should spoon their own eyes out if they can't stop looking at women.
Right. So. I'm like, it's not on me, dude. That's on you. But so I spent so much of my life learning to make myself small, learning to cover myself up, learning to be, pleasant and polite and to be smiley and to be, and those things are not inherently bad or wrong, but it was all I knew how to do. And so,
and it's the reason why you're doing them. If you're doing them because that's who you are as a person, that's who you are. If you're doing them because it's against your religion to be problematic by having an opinion and preferences in terms of what you wear, that's where it becomes an issue.
Right. And so a lot of it was unlearning that I was not responsible for the thoughts of men who might see me and think certain thoughts. That was not my responsibility. Secondly, so I met my husband when I was 25. We were both seniors in college. We met each other. And the first couple of years that we were together, I would sort of like ask him for permission to wear certain things, like to wear them out in public, right? Like I would wear them in front of him. And like we were living together before we got married. We were already living in sin. So like whatever. But in terms of like, if I wanted to wear a kind of a sexy outfit out for a date night, or if we were going to go out with friends or whatever, and I would be like, is this too much? Like, should I put a jacket on? Like, should I put on a longer shirt or something? And he would be like, babe, you look super hot. I don't care. And actually, he's always really excited when I wear like sexy things. He's like, then I get to look at all of you all the time. It's great.
Yeah.
But it's like, I love that. Like we love the energy. But I did ask, right? And I've gotten better about it now. I start wearing what I want. But for a long time, I did have to be like, is this okay? Like, do you think it's too much? And he would be like, babe, if you like it, just wear it. I don't care. Like, why does my opinion matter on this?
Like, are you going to have sex with somebody else while you're wearing that? Or no, if you're not, then you're fine.
Then it doesn't matter. I don't care. Right. So a lot of it was that. A lot of it was learning to be like confident and comfortable in my body. Like, I never learned how to like dress for my body, right? Because I was so concerned with covering it up. And so I didn't know about like, you can wear things that accentuate your waist or accentuate your ass if you want to.
Yeah.
You can wear things that make your legs look good or things that just like, highlight your body shape. And that's not bad or wrong to do that.
And it's so interesting because you are the first person I've ever spoken to that made the connection between their deconstruction and changing like their clothing and their body image. I never would have even considered. But as you say it, that is exactly the experience I had, where it's like, as I began deconstructing, I also began being more open with like fashion and different shapes. Bought my first bikini at like 27, 26. Interesting. Nice. You've like boggled my mind. I never even made that connection whatsoever. I thought it was just me growing up. I didn't even think about.
And I think that's part of it too, for sure. I think part of it is just being a little more mature and being a little more comfortable in yourself as a person.
But I think a lot of it is purity culture.
It totally is. It totally is. Just, the emphasis put on young women to be responsible for policing themselves, policing other women who might be dressing inappropriately, policing men's thoughts, because that's what it is, right? It's like, oh, well, if a man sees that my jeans are too tight, he's going to think sexy thoughts about my ass. And so then that's on me.
And he's going to be out of control.
That is the thing that I've had an issue with forever, that they're like, women are too emotional. We can't put a woman in president. She might have a period and then like nuke someone. And I'm like, have you ever seen a horny man before?
Right. I was going to say, a male president might see a booty and then send us to war over somebody's thick ass.
Or just like, men are such emotional creatures. We all are. We're human beings. It's part of who we are as creatures, right? But men that have started wars over like, I wanted to date that woman, but you said you wanted to date that woman. And the woman really could not give a fuck about either of you, but you guys went to war for 200 years over that. So
if you don't think that men can be emotional, I challenge you to go on YouTube and look up compilations of what they do when their favorite sports team loses.
Oh my God.
It's insane. Oh my God. It's fucking crazy.
It's and insane. Like, that's fine. You're allowed to be emotional about your sports team, bro. Like, nobody gives a fuck.
But I'm not over here changing legislation. You know what I mean?
Like my hormones fluctuated once. Like,
right. With you? Right. I'm not here denying that I have emotions and hormones that change my behavior.
Yeah.
So you get into like an adult relationship, right? And you start to have these changes and you start to dress differently and like think differently and feel differently. Do you feel like the way that you were raised and like the religion that you were raised in impacted how you treated your partner too when you first got together, or how you acted around them? Like, what are some things that you, looking back, you're like, oh, I absolutely would have done things differently?
So definitely in a few different ways. First of all, so my mom, for better or worse, has always been an extremely strong and independent woman. Yeah. She kind of had to be her whole life. She dealt with a lot of abusive relationships and a lot of hard times. And so she did also teach me to do that, which again, for better or worse. And so as you might imagine, me being a strong, independent woman with my own thoughts and opinions does not mesh well with the, trad wife image that Christians want us to have. And and so when I got into my relationship with my husband, some of that was very hard for me, and he didn't seem to have a problem with it, but I had a lot of sort of preconceived notions about like division of household duties, for example. So when we moved in together and we were sort of talking about how to split up household chores, who was going to be in charge of what, who was paying for what, that sort of thing. And that was very difficult for me to navigate. I did get awfully snippy with him on a couple of occasions. We were talking about money, and it wasn't that I was mad at him. I was just overwhelmed and frustrated about the situation because it didn't know what to do. Right. But so definitely there was some friction there where we were sort of, and some of that too, I think just comes from two people that start living together. Right. So you have to learn that, but
growing pains.
But a lot of it was definitely, and even now, sometimes I still have some sort of preconceived notions about what my role is as a wife. So my husband works from home, and like we both work full time, but I go into an office to work and he works from home. So since he works from home, he has taken on a lot of like sort of household chores because he's here, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, so I can just like leave my computer and like go
should.
do dishes or like throw laundry in the dryer or whatever, right? And so I love that he does that. I'm very appreciative that he's able to do those things to keep our home nice, you know, to help with chores and everything. And so I do a lot of the outside the house chores, right? So like I go to the grocery store, I take things to UPS, I, you know, go out and pay bills or whatever, right? And like I do household stuff too, but he takes on a lot more of that because he's home all the time.
Yeah.
And that made me feel like I was doing a bad job as a wife. You know what I mean? Because I'm not like,
you're
like,
a poor man having to do so much of your slack.
Right. And also just some things make sense. So like, so I learned how to cook, right? And I also learned more during the pandemic because DoorDash got really expensive. So I had to learn, right? So we didn't eat the same 3 things every day. But so I learned how to cook and I really like to cook. That's something I enjoy doing.
Yeah.
I hate dishes. They're the worst and I do them because I have to as a person, but I hate them. And so did not really learn to cook when he was growing up. Like he would survive if he were alone, but like he doesn't know a lot. He doesn't have a lot of knowledge, and he also doesn't really care to.
The way that men would eat if nobody was watching.
Oh, he's told me, like, I've gone on like trips occasionally. I've been gone for 3 or 4 days, and he's like, "Yeah, I ate Filiberto's like every day."
Yep, like, Domino's pizza. 100% still in business because of men. Just gonna say.
Yeah. But so I do all of the cooking in our house, or I do most of the cooking, and then he does the dishes after, right? Nice. And that's something that works really well for us. And cooking is a lot of work, right? I take the time to plan the recipe. I go to the grocery store and get all the stuff. And also like, I like to make things from scratch, not every day, but you know, so like if I'm gonna make beef stew, like it isn't just open the can and dump it in a pot, right? Like I gotta chop all the vegetables and I gotta like do all this stuff. And I do it because I like it. It's a labor of love for me. It's something I enjoy and something that makes me feel good to like share with other people. But then it's still sort of like, but I didn't do the dishes though. And as a wife, it's part of the household duties, right? That I should be doing.
Right.
So that's definitely a factor. Certainly the body image stuff and just being okay with like I said, my husband's told me on a number of occasions that like, he loves that I wear bikinis now. He's so into that, right? That he's like, babe, I love summertime. He also loves the fall because he loves yoga pants season.
Yes.
Right? And like when I started, that was my first sort of foray into like, things I was forbidden like from wearing as a Christian. Yeah. And then I was like living on my own house with my own money. And I was like, but yoga pants are so comfy though. And I was definitely one of those like yoga pants are not real pants. And now I'm like, bitch, I will absolutely wear my yoga pants at the grocery store. I don't give a fuck. Like,
if you cannot see my bare ass, they're pants.
Yeah. And I'm like, you can wear them too. You want to go get some? Like you can go get yoga pants. That's fine.
Yeah.
Right. So like that sort of stuff. But so that definitely took some unlearning. And then the other thing I think too is, and I don't know if maybe you can speak to this because I know you talked a little bit earlier about, you know, the man is the head of the household, but mom runs the show, right?
Yes.
And so in my house, a lot of it was definitely that my mom expected my dad to read her mind. And to a certain extent, like, yes, I totally understand weaponized incompetence. I totally understand learned helplessness. Like those are very real things. But also I feel like when you're living with another person, if you have a problem, then you should be like, you know, hey, Sydney, would you really mind if you could like, please try to like, you know, turn the lights off when you leave the room? Oh yeah, sorry, my bad.
Yes.
And then it's not an issue anymore. Like we talked about, we addressed it. It's not a big deal. But my mom would not talk to my dad. And then she would get really upset that he didn't just guess or just like do it without her having to ask him.
And he would have no idea anything was wrong. So he would keep doing things the way he always has. And she would get madder and he would have no idea why.
Yeah. And it would just create this terrible feedback loop. Right. And so I definitely learned some of that, which I did not realize until I was living in my own house with a partner.
Yes.
And then I would definitely sometimes make the assumption that like, well, it's obvious to me, so it should be obvious to him. Why isn't he doing it? Why does he do this when it's very annoying to me or whatever, right? And so that was really something that I had to check myself about of like, Like, yes, he is an adult person with a brain. That is true. But if you want something done or you want it done in a specific way, that's on you to communicate that, right? Like, you can't wait on someone else to sort of guess what it is that you want and then be mad when they don't do it correctly. That doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
And so, so that's something that my husband and I have worked on a lot, of just being able to communicate better with each other.
Yes.
And making sure that I am not making those assumptions.
Yes.
That he can, that he will just assume, or that he will be able to guess what I'm thinking. And so a lot of that, I think.
Yes.
I think really what a lot of it is that I really had to learn how to exist as an equal partner in a relationship.
Right.
Because that's not something that we do in Christian circles, right?
We shoulder so much, and we don't express how stressful it is to shoulder that much. And then one day we just fucking snap at our men, and they're like, whoa, whoa. Like,
right. And they're just like, oh my God, this bitch is crazy. And you're like, oh my God, why can't you just take out the fucking garbage? Right. And like, it's not that serious, but now it is serious because you
because it's not just the garbage. It's this thing and that thing and this thing and that, but we didn't bring up any of it. And then the garbage just made us lose our fucking mind.
Right.
Yes. Yes. In my house, I have definitely had to learn that instead of criticizing, I should ask questions.
Yes.
The big one.
With that. Yes.
The big one. And I still work on this. And Vince, if you're listening to this, I love you. The way that man unloads a dishwasher, I will never fathom. No. And so at first it would just make me crazy. But now I'm like, question for you. The Tupperware goes down here, right? Right. Okay. So why are all the lids over there in a pile? I don't know. Okay. Doesn't it make sense that the Tupperware and the lids should be okay? Silverware goes here, right? Okay. So why are since there's like 4 slots, why are they all mixed up? Like, why don't we separate? I'm just curious because there's a slot for each one, right? Like, we agree. Okay. Right. Like, lots of that where you're just like, but at the same time, he tells me that he can tell when I've been home because every cabinet is open. Every single cabinet is just hanging open. I have no memory of doing this, but I have been alone. Like, he was gone for like a month, and I realized the cabinets were open for a whole month straight. So I get that, right? But it's much more effective to try and ask questions to see if there is logic behind an action. And then through asking questions, they see, oh, she's right. It does make sense. The lids and the containers should go together. Whether or not it happens has yet to be determined. But
that's a separate conversation.
That's a whole right. And so, but I recognize, very similar to what you were talking about, also something that I've definitely had to work on is, even though I feel like something should be said a certain way, if he were to say it to me like that, would that be acceptable to me? Would that hurt my feelings? Would I be offended by that? And if I would be hurt by him saying it to me like that, then I shouldn't say it to him like that. Even if I feel like I'm in the right, even if I feel like I've said it a million times, if he came to me with that attitude, would it be a red flag to me? Would I think about it? Would it live rent free in my head? Then I'm not going to say it to him like that. Like, that's been a big one for me, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
I definitely had an issue with being passive aggressive, which I've worked on a lot to that. And also just like being condescending. Right.
Yes.
And and I didn't even intentionally mean to be, right? Like, it wasn't like, oh, my husband's an idiot, so I have to talk to him like he's 5, right? Like, it wasn't a conscious thought of that, but it was like just sort of like instinctual, right?
Yes.
You know, that it's like, well, I guess I'm just gonna have to do it because clearly you can't handle this, right? You know, and just like, that's so unnecessary. It's mean, it's aggressive, like, it's not even passive, it's just aggressive.
Skips the passive part.
And also, what does it do to help the problem? Right. And that's really what was a big realization for me, is like, is this actually helping the problem? Right.
Yeah.
Because, like, I watched my parents do it. And what do you know? My dad did not naturally get better at doing the things he was supposed to be doing. And my mom didn't get less angry about it. Like, they just keep having the same fight over and over. Right.
Yes.
And so it's like, okay, so if I am annoyed or confused about something that my husband did, then we should be like, hey, babe, so I just had a question about this, right? And then usually it's like oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot to do that. Let me do that real quick. Okay, cool,
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Problem resolved, right? And so
Yes.
really, if the goal is just to resolve the issue, then like being condescending doesn't help. Being passive aggressive doesn't help. Like that's not fixing the problem.
Right.
So.
And also sometimes like just telling somebody how you feel. So a couple of months ago, my doctor accidentally gave me the depot a month too soon. So it was a bad month. It was a bad month. But I would tell him, I would say like, I know that it seems like I'm acting irrational, and I recognize that I'm acting irrational, but I truly feel this upset right now. Like in my body, in my bones, I am this upset about this thing, and I want you to know that the feelings are genuine. I understand that the situation does not normally warrant this reaction, but I want you to know that whatever just happened, whether it was something you said or something you did or something you didn't do, it genuinely makes me feel this way whether I want to or not. Like, I don't want to be this mad, but I'm telling you, biologically, I am this upset. And I just need you to acknowledge that that is how I feel right now. And it doesn't make sense, and it won't, but I can't stop that I am this upset. And like, maybe I'll feel better in an hour. Maybe it'll last 2 days. Guess we'll find out. But that's also really helpful too. Like, because we think we're not allowed to bring stuff up until it makes sense. We think like, I don't want to start this argument until I have a reason and a response into this. Sometimes all it takes is, I am sobbing right now. And that is how I feel. Even though I have no idea why, I am sobbing, I am sad, and I feel this way. And I just would like for you to not treat me like I'm being an emotional woman. And he's like, okay, I'm sorry you're sad. Is there anything I can do? Not really. Okay, great. Like, go do your deeds or whatever, and I'll leave you alone until you don't feel like crying anymore.
Well, and that actually made me think of something else too. That so much of Christianity like makes you feel ashamed for having feelings. Right. And so the idea of asking my partner for comfort was like a completely foreign concept to me.
He's gonna think you're weak. He's gonna think you're high maintenance.
And also, I don't know if you had this experience. So I was diagnosed with ADHD at age 30, which like explains
age 30.
Yeah. So that was like, that explains so many things about my childhood, right? But so also knowing that I was a child with undiagnosed ADHD in the church, right? So much of that was just looked on as I was being blatantly disrespectful.
You needed a spanking.
I was choosing to be disruptive. I was choosing to sin, right? And that it was on me because I got bored during a 2-hour-long church service, right? And that was on me and that was my fault. I have anxiety. I wonder why that happened. Right? Wonder what could have possibly given me the anxiety. But so, and like, I have therapy and stuff, right? That has helped a lot with that as an adult. But a lot of that was like, I was taught that anxiety was a sin because that meant that you weren't trusting God enough, right? If you had anxiety or if you worried about the future, and also too, because they always equate it, right? Like, this is not me being generally worried about like, oh, I wonder if I'll be a good mom if I have a baby. Or like, oh, I'm worried that maybe I'll never get married and won't find someone. Like, those are worries. Anxiety is like, I think everyone in this room is looking at me and thinks that I'm suck and that I am the worst.
Or like, I think I'm going to burn forever in the fiery pits of hell.
Yeah,
because
right?
I looked at a girl and liked what I saw.
Yeah, right? That I was like, oh, I masturbated today. So, now I'm in danger of going to hell forever. Right? And so, or whatever it might be. And so, learning to, first of all, accept those feelings, right? It's a lot of like therapy, right? It's like learning to feel your feelings and like accept that they're happening. So part of it was that. And then part of it also was just learning to communicate those feelings to my partner. And then also being able to ask my partner to help meet whatever needs I have, right? Because that's not something I was ever able to do before.
Right.
So now, and I'm still not great at it, right? Like, it's still hard for me. Yeah. It's hard for me to ask for help, period. And so it's sometimes really hard for me to like acknowledge it, but sometimes I can just go to my husband and be like, today was a shit day. And I really would just like to lie on the couch and cuddle with you for 10 minutes and then watch a TV show. And he's like, that's cool, babe. We can totally do that. Right. And sometimes we talk about it and sometimes we don't. Sometimes I don't need to talk about it. Sometimes I'm just like, I just need to lay here with you for like 5 minutes and not think about it. And then I'll be good. Right.
Yeah. Yes.
But that's not something I was able to do before, to be able to ask my partner for that, because previously it would have been like, well, you should pray about it. Right.
Yeah. Yes.
Talk to God. God will ease all your anxieties. God will help all your worries. And I'm like, well, theoretically, yes, but also I prayed and I'm still anxious. So
well, and like, why can we never agree that God invented therapists and that you should go to therapy because God put therapists?
Well,
like, why is that
of the devil?
Right.
That's,
well,
I've
always wondered why that's not always an option, right? And of course, there are some more liberal churches and there are some more conservative churches, but I have two theories. One, every person I've ever talked to who got in trouble in church and deconstructed, whatever, always has ADHD.
Interesting.
Every single time someone's on this podcast telling me a story about how they got in trouble in church, yada yada, that this didn't make sense, that didn't make sense, they weren't allowed to ask certain questions, yada yada, and then later deconstructed, either on the record or off the record, I'll be like, do you have ADHD? And they're like, yeah, I was diagnosed as an adult. And I'm like, me too. And I think it's because we are also more curious, or at least more openly curious, where like a kid without ADHD may wonder stuff, may Google stuff. Kids with ADHD can't shut the fuck up. So we're like, why is this that way? Why do we have to do what he's like? Why is this so weird? Where a neurotypical kid would be like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, why do we have to do that? Maybe I should like wonder this and ask this in private. But also, to your other point, my problem with organized religion, specifically American Christianity, evangelical, or honestly mainstream, even just like your run-of-the-mill Baptist, is that the onus is put on people for their own correction. So even if the church doesn't specifically tell you what is happening to you is your fault because this, you already know, it's already ingrained in the lesson that your relationship with God is based on how much effort you are willing to put into it. Are you talking to him? Are you asking him forgiveness? Are you praying? Are you listening when he's answering? If you're praying and you're not getting the answer, it's because you're not listening the way you're supposed to. God has probably already shown you the answer, but you're too busy looking for the answer that you want, that you've missed what the actual answer is. So you grow up with this idea that anything that's going wrong, anything that's not happening the way you wanted it to, anything that you want is your problem and your fault. And also, I think that's why so many women I know who were raised evangelical or even mainstream Christian have issues their first few relationships, is because we're told that the greatest love we'll ever have is from a man we can't see, we can't talk to, we can't communicate with, who has already given us the answer. We're just not seeing it well. We need to serve. We need to figure out what that answer is. And then they wonder why we end up with these toxic guys who do silent treatment and, I shouldn't have to tell you, like, you should already know what I want, blah, blah, blah. Well, because the greatest loving relationship we've ever been in is with a man who we had to figure shit out all by ourselves on how to make things better. It was our job to make it better. It was our job to communicate. It was our job to do everything. And we were just supposed to know that we were loved, we were cared for, he's there for us. He's never done anything for us. He's never shown any. And I hate when people say things like daddy issues. I'm like, it is, but it's not the father you think it is. That's the problem. So those are my 2 points. It's like, one, I think I would love for somebody with more credentials than me to do a study on the connection between ADHD and deconstructing, because there's 100% a link there. And two, if every single time you have a problem, you are given instructions on how to fix it yourself. It's not a prescription. It's not like, oh, go pick up this thing that'll help you or go talk to this person who will help you. It's always, here's your list of chores for the week to make it better for you. And if it doesn't work, we already know it's because you didn't do it right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what the hell? Why is nobody out here saying, I don't know, maybe God invented therapy because he wants the people he loves so much to have somebody to talk to and like unload their problems on and get some advice from.
So, the way that I learned about that, like in regards to like mental illness and things like that and neurodivergency is, I think it comes from a lot of people who are of the opinion that God doesn't make mistakes. Right. And so like, but mistakes happen all the time. That's very clear. Right. And whether that's a person who's neurodivergent, whether that's a person who is born with the wrong number of limbs, a person who is born with a chronic illness, right? Like there are lots of ways. Yeah, right. Like those aren't natural. Right. Like, did God not make a mistake? You just have to be blind forever now because that was not what God and God's plan for you, right? And so I think that the resistance to acknowledging mental illness and then also to treating it is because like, well, God doesn't make mistakes. Like I remember I was talking to my therapist once about my ADHD and how, you know, like it simultaneously made a lot of things made more sense, but it also made things very frustrating because I was like, I know this is an ADHD problem, but I don't know how to fix it. Right.
Yes.
And so I was experiencing a lot of frustration with that. And she made a comment to me that she was like, well, that's partly because your ADHD wasn't made for this. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, well, in the old days of hunters and gatherers, something like ADHD would have made a lot of sense, right? Like being hyper aware of your surroundings, being able to hyper fixate on this one thing that I have to get done, or, you know, being able to sort of be aware of a lot of things at one time, being able to shift your priorities very quickly.
Multitask.
Right? Those skills in certain situations are super useful. And then I ended up here in 2024 working in a job where I sit at a cubicle and look at a screen all day. And my ADHD is like, oh my God, we can't deal with this. Right?
Yes.
And that's why I have problems. And so I was like, oh, I hadn't really thought about that. Right. And really, to me, if you think about all of these mistakes, right? These people that God would call like God's mistakes, right? It's evolution trying to fix the problem. You're going to make mistakes on the way, right? So they were like, let's try making these people able to hyper focus. Oh, they can only hyper focus on one thing at a time. That's bad. That's problematic. Okay, we got to try again and do something else.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Or like, do people really need 4 limbs? You don't need 4 limbs. And then a person comes out without 4 limbs and they're like, oh, well, yeah, okay, I guess that is kind of the optimal design now. So we're going to roll with that for a while. You know,
that
just
that the people with only 2 limbs are the ones that get eaten the first because they
and so like they're still people, they still deserve a spot in society, but in terms of, you know, like it makes way more sense to me that it's Mother Nature's way of trying to improve than just that God makes no mistakes, and the fact that you were born with ADHD or that you were born with cerebral palsy or whatever is because of sin or because God hates you specifically or whatever it might be. Yep. And that has never made any sense to me.
Yes.
But yeah, so I think like you were just talking about the ADHD link. I have a friend who is ex-Mormon who is autistic. And so I do wonder if part of it is just for kids that grow up neurodivergent in religion. Yeah. Like because I always asked because I wanted to know, right? Like I was such a curious child that I wanted to learn all the things. And so when I asked questions, it wasn't inherently that I was trying to disprove the religion. I wasn't trying to start fights about theology. I was just like, you know, like even as a very small child and being like, how did Noah feed all the animals on the ark? That just seems like it would be really hard to feed all those animals. And how do the animals not eat each other on the ark? Because that seems like it would be a problem, right?
Yes.
These are those things that my like 8-year-old brain was like, yeah, I would like to know how that worked because that seems like a problem to me. And then just like, you just have to believe what the Bible says. And I was like, I do. I just have other questions. I would just like to know some other stuff, right? And so, but the problem is the older you get, the more that you learn, then you start asking questions people really don't like.
Right. Like when I was a kid, my parents went through this insane phase where they let me have any pet that I could take care of. I had to take really good care of it. I couldn't just do like baseline, keep it alive. So I had way too many pets. I had a fuck ton of pets. But I remember thinking, my iguana Ziggy, all of his food has to go in the fridge. He doesn't eat anything that can't go in the fridge. So how did Noah keep all that different kinds of food cold? How did he do that? Where was his fridge? They didn't have a refrigerator back then. Like, how did he feed his iguanas? Because he had two of them, right? And also, I had finches, and we had an issue where we had to constantly rehome them and like trade them in and out with pet stores and stuff, because after about 2 generations they would start to have birth defects because they were too inbred and the babies would die like this horrible death. And I remember thinking, if there were only 2 of every animal on the ark, how did the finches cover the world when I can't even get mine to live past like mommies and babies having babies together? They die after that. Yeah, like I saw with my own eyes that it doesn't work. I saw the problem. And then to your point where, you know, God doesn't make mistakes, I have a friend named Steve, and he walks with double canes. And he said he doesn't understand why Christians in 1 minute will be like, you are perfect the way you are, God makes no mistakes. And in the other minute will constantly be laying hands on him, trying to heal him. And he's like, which is it? He's like, am I perfect the way I am because that's not a mistake? Or is it a mistake that I can heal with hands being laid on me? And I think it's the neurospicy kids that are the ones being like, that doesn't make sense, thinking they're being helpful. None of us are trying to be assholes. We're, like you said, we're curious. We want to learn. And in school, when we ask questions, we get praise for it. We're told we're so smart and so curious. And wow, we're just a learner. And then in church, it's like, shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up.
Don't ever say that again. You're like, I just wanted to know, bitch, but okay. Like, everybody just calm down. Like, it's not that serious.
Everybody needs to relax. That's what we say in my house. Everybody needs to relax. Everybody just needs to relax. So if somebody's listening to this and they're like, wow, like this speaks to me. Misty's story is what I thought I was alone in experiencing. I want to get to the point of deconstruction where Misty is. What would you say? What would you recommend? What advice would you give somebody who hopes to be where you are one day?
So I think that one of the best things that I ever did was meeting people different from me. And I know that that sounds pretty basic.
It's huge.
But like I said, right, I grew up in a small town of less than 1,000 people that was mostly white and at least culturally Christian, if not devout and actively practicing. And so that was my entire experience of the world. And so it's very easy, you know, and I know because I'm guilty of it too, right? It's very easy to vilify people who are so homophobic and transphobic, people who are so racist, people who have such awful ideas about other humans in the world, right? But the thing is that when you have never had to experience that, it's very easy to turn those people into villains. You know, so like the idea of trans people being groomers, right? Or, oh, trans people want to get into the bathrooms to, like, you know, assault women. Okay, so at this point in my life, I've had a number of friends who have been trans, and when you know, they're all just people. They're trying to go to work. They're trying to take care of their dogs. They're trying to deal with relationship problems. They're trying to go to the grocery store. Like, they're just living their life just like any other human person would. Being able to meet people from other races and other cultures than me, meeting people who are of different gender or sexual orientations than me, people with different religious beliefs. Like, I really do believe that relationships with other humans is really how we break it down.
Yes.
And now I will say, especially because you are involved in the Fundie Center community and, you know, there's some discourse about this. I think that there is a way to hold space for people to learn and people to grow while not endorsing their views that they currently hold. Right?
Yes. I always say that the best thing that ever happened to me in my whole life were the people in college who I would spout off my ignorant shit and they would go, why though? Like, where did you hear? Would you be surprised to find out that this and this and this, as opposed to, what an ignorant bitch. I'm never going to talk to her again. Wow, this and that. The other. And they took the time to be like, actually, you'd be really surprised to find out this. And I'm like, I'm just constantly being shocked, offended for a second because I can't possibly be wrong, but then Googling it and finding out they're actually right. I cannot thank those people enough for, very much like you said, holding that space and allowing me to be just fucking shook by what I was learning.
Yeah. And so I also do want to say, I think that there's something to be said for not expecting other people to do the emotional labor for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in this day and age of the internet, like, read a book, watch YouTube videos, listen to podcasts. Like, if you want to get exposure to lifestyles that are different from yours, there are people on TikTok talking about it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, there are lots of, or especially too, I think about some of our brothers and sisters who live in very insulated communities. We also know that white supremacy is a very real threat among Christian evangelicals, and that's by design, right? And they insulate their communities from people of color, from people who are of different cultures, people who are of different genders and orientations, because they're trying to create their little magical white Christian utopia where, like, everything is beautiful and magical here, and we got rid of all the weirdos, right? And so, or anybody who doesn't fit in our mold. And so I think that I understand it can be very hard to do that in some situations. But like I said, with the internet, you can get it for free. You can watch people's videos, right? Like, follow anti-racism, influencers on TikTok. Watch YouTube videos of other people's deconstruction stories. Listen to Sydney Davis's podcast. You're already here, but listen to the other episodes.
Yay!
But there are so many people with such vastly different life experiences who are just humans, right? Mm-hmm. We're all just trying to do our best. We're all trying to find life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? So we're all trying to do here. And there's a lot of ways to go about that. And so I think that for a person that's really trying to get to that point, it's very easy to fall back on your beliefs as being like, well, because I understand the world this way, this must be how it is, because this is how I learned it. So being able to not just consider that you might be wrong, which is kind of the first step, but secondly, go and find the evidence, right? If you're like, well, I learned that the world is this way. Okay. If you want to know if it's true, go find proof.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That really is what it is. It's like, and the thing is, if your arguments hold up, then you're right and everything is good. And if it doesn't, then now you have something to think about, right? And now you have something to evaluate in terms of what you believe, why you believe that, and what you're going to do about it.
Yes.
And it's not easy. It's not fun. I will say I'm really grateful for things like your podcast or for other sort of, communities online of people that are deconstructing, because I didn't have that when I deconstructed. At age 21 in college, I did, thankfully, my community college, for being in a small conservative town, had a free thinkers group.
Wow.
There was like, it was secular humanists and atheists and whatever. A lot of them had been previously religious. And so I did have that, which was very nice, but lots of people don't even have that much. Right.
Right.
And also, even with those people, like, a lot of the ones who had deconstructed were much older than me, people in like their 50s and 60s. And so being able to talk about my current struggles as a young person, navigating the world, figuring out who I was, figuring out what I believed, figuring out what place in the world was, that was a very isolating experience.
Right.
My friends who weren't religious were supportive, but didn't understand because they hadn't lived it. Right. Obviously, I was sort of, at the time, my only person I knew who had been religious and was not anymore. So I couldn't talk to the religious friends who eventually left. Right.
Right.
And that was very isolating. It was very, very hard. I had to do a lot of that work on my own to sort of figure those things out. And so I'm very glad that in this day and age that doesn't have to be the case anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
But part of it is that you do have to go out and find it sometimes, especially if you are living, are people who live in the Bible Belt or people who live in very conservative parts of the U.S. Everyone around you is Christian. It's just the standard practice. You can find other experiences out there. You just have to go look for them.
Yes, and because algorithms have gotten so good, because algorithms are like, this is what you like, this is what we're going to show you. I always recommend people, if they're like bare bones from scratch, starting right now, researching like opposing viewpoints, I always recommend that they go on Reddit and they follow the subreddits that are the complete opposite of them. So, like, if you go onto my Reddit, I don't know if there's a way for people to see what you follow, but I follow like red pill women, male red pill Christian. I follow like all the forums where the members are actually members of those groups. Because where we run into trouble is when all we're reading is like somebody else's opinion, like some
Right.
writer's article about gays. It's like, okay, but what are the gays actually saying? Like, do they like,
Right.
what are the, you know what I mean? I love following groups where the actual members in those groups are members of those communities. Because either you're going to be shook by what you learn, you're going to have an image in your mind of what they're going to be like and find out they're the complete opposite of what you thought, or you're going to get evidence to back up all the things that you thought were true about those people. Like all the male red pill shit, now I have evidence and screenshots to back up what I don't like about that. You know what I mean? But at least now I'm
Like, I didn't just make it up. Here's the evidence.
Yes, like now I'm informed about it, right? But that's like, I think that's really wonderful advice, is you're either going to find that things are the complete opposite of what you've always thought, or you're going to find they're the exact thing you've always heard, but you're going to have evidence, reasons, purposes, links, forums, content backing it up, as opposed to just regurgitating what somebody told you once about something.
Right.
So I think you're absolutely right. I think that's really good advice, Misty. But this has been a really fantastic conversation. I recognize I've kept you a little bit later than I said I would,
That's all
but
good.
for anybody listening, whether you're listening or watching, in the comments, as always, there is a way to reach out to me. You can contact me either via my website or via email. And if you have any questions for Misty, or if you have anything, if you heard anything that we talked about that you have further questions about, or you want to give your opinion on, or you'd like to hear Misty's answers to your questions, please submit those. I'll send them all to Misty, or comment in the comment section if you're on YouTube. And we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your thoughts and perspectives. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you want to build upon anything we said? Do you have questions about anything we said? And Misty, thank you so much for your time and your perspective. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed getting to chat with you today. And so for the listeners, the watchers, just remember that it is a process. I think that that's also really important to remember. Some people, it happens very quickly. Some people, it takes years. And there really is no right way to do it. Also, I think a lot of people are very scared of like, oh my God, am I going to be an atheist now? Maybe, or maybe not. You know, it's not like there are more than just the two ends of Christian and atheist, right? There's not two ends of the spectrum, right?
Right.
They are two options.
Yeah.
And so it is hard. It is not fun. It can be very frustrating. It can be very isolating. But if it's something that's really important to you, like, you'll get there eventually, you know?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have to be today. It doesn't have to be tomorrow. Like, really just keep learning. That's all you can do is keep learning, and the rest will work itself out. You know?
And you never have to pick a label if you don't want one.
That's also true.